The morning of July 15, 1410, began with a quiet sky, soft wind, and a rising sun that touched the fields of Grunwald with a warm golden light. But beneath that peaceful scene stood an army that believed it was blessed by God himself. Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen, leader of the Teutonic Order, stood at the head of 20,000 armored knights and soldiers. To him, this day would not end in doubt or fear. It would end in victory, glory, the destruction of the Polish-Lithuanian alliance once and for all. The Teutonic Knights were not ordinary warriors. They were men who prayed like monks, but fought like lions. For 200 years they had carried the Black Cross on their white cloaks across Prussia, Latvia, and Estonia. They took land, built castles, and forced entire tribes to convert to Christianity. In the Baltic region, their name alone created fear. Parents had scared children with stories of their ironclad riders. Kings respected them. Even the Pope treated their Grand Masters as champions of God's will. And this morning, as the sun rose, they felt unstoppable. Ulrich led his knights through morning mass. Thousands of armored men stood in rows, shining like silver in the early light. They bowed their heads, listened to scripture, and received communion. The priests' voices rose softly, mixing with the rustle of banners and the distant call of ravens. Every man felt certain that God would guide their swords. Across the field, Ulrich could see the enemy army forming. King Władysław Jagiello of Poland stood with his 40,000 men, force a strange and diverse mix that many Teutonic knights openly mocked. The Poles wore Western armor like the Germans, but the Lithuanian riders next to them wore lighter gear, carried composite bows, and still followed some old pagan traditions. Behind them stood Orthodox Russians, who the Teutonic Order considered heretics. And near the back were the Totter Horse archers. Muslims from the steppe to the Teutonic Knights, this was not a real Christian army. It was a mix of unbelievers, heretics, and pagans. They believed such a force stood no chance against their armored might. Ulrich watched them calmly. His white cloak bright against his steel armor, he believed that by sunset he would crush this strange alliance and return home with new lands, new wealth, and new glory for the Order. Behind him stood 20,000 elite fighters, men trained since childhood to wield sword, lance, and mace with deadly skill. Their armor was the finest German craftsmen could produce. Their heavy war horses were worth more than most peasants' farms. Their treasury contained enough gold to hire entire armies if needed. And most important of all, they had never lost a major battle. To Ulrich, numbers did not matter. Quality did. Faith did. And he trusted both. While the Teutonic Knights prayed, Jagiello's army also prepared, but with a different kind of calm. The Polish king was patient and clever. He knew he was facing the strongest military force in Europe, but he also knew the weakness of arrogance. He understood that Ulrich believed victory was guaranteed, and sometimes a man who is too sure of victory cannot see danger coming. The battlefield stretched between three villages: Grunwald, Annenberg, and Zalgiris. These names would become legend, but at that moment they were simply quiet farming communities with wide fields of grain. The land was mostly flat, perfect for heavy cavalry charges. But nearby forests and hidden marshes added danger. A knight who charged too far could find his horse sinking into mud. A man too focused on glory could become trapped in the trees. Ulrich believed he had chosen the battlefield perfectly. He saw the narrowness of the field not as a trap, but as a way to force the enemy to fight his way. He ordered ditches to be dug to break enemy charges. He placed his forces on slightly higher ground. Everything seemed to favor him. The morning mist slowly lifted, revealing two massive armies staring at each other across 1 kilometer of open field. Teutonic banners with black crosses fluttered in the hot wind. Polish banners with golden eagles swayed in answer. Lithuanian flags with ancient symbols stood beside Russian icons. Soon, the quiet morning would become something else entirely. Before the first sword was lifted, the Teutonic Knights made their confidence painfully clear. As the day grew hotter, Ulrich grew impatient. His men had been standing in heavy armor since dawn, sweating under the July sun. So he sent 2 heralds to the Polish king, each carrying a naked sword. The message was simple and insulting. You hide in the forest like cowards. Our Grand Master sends you these swords so you may have weapons to fight with. Come out and face us like men. The Teutonic knights roared with laughter when they heard the message. They believed the insult would force the Poles into a foolish early attack, but King Jagiho did not respond with anger. He continued hearing mass, ignoring the Teutonic provocation. His army rested in the shade of the trees, while the Teutonic knights continued to bake in the open sun. Hours passed. The heat grew worse. Men in steel armor felt like they were standing inside boiling pots. Some knights quietly prayed for the battle to begin, so they could at least ride and feel wind on their faces. Still, Jagiho waited. By noon, Ulrich's confidence had not changed, but the conditions around him had. His men were hot, tired, and dehydrated before the first arrow was even shot. Yet still, he expected an easy victory. This was the dawn of invincibility, a morning when the Teutonic knights believed nothing could defeat them. A morning when their pride was as heavy as their armor. A morning they thought God had blessed. But by the end of the day, that same field would be covered with their broken bodies, their white cloaks soaked in blood, their Grand Master lying dead among the fallen, and the world would learn that even the strongest army can fall in a single. Afternoon, as midday approached. The mist that covered the fields of Grunwald completely lifted, revealing 2 enormous armies facing one another with growing tension. The quiet sunrise had tricked the land into feeling peaceful. But now, the fields looked like a giant arena prepared for a clash no one in Europe would ever forget. On one side, the Teutonic Order stood like a wall of steel. Rows of white cloaks with black crosses stretched across the field, shining under the burning July sun. Their armor was heavy, their weapons polished, and their discipline unmatched. Every knight looked forward with calm confidence, believing that they already knew how this battle would end. They had better equipment, better training, and in their minds, the blessing of God himself. But the truth on the ground was more complicated. Across the field, the polished Lithuanian army prepared in complete silence. It did not look like one single army. It looked like a collection of nations, cultures, and traditions that did not seem to belong together. Yet every man in that massive force shared one emotion: hatred for the Teutonic Order. The Polish heavy cavalry stood at the front. Their armor matched the Teutonic knights in strength and beauty, formed by skilled blacksmiths in Krakow and Poznan. Their lances were long, their shields decorated with eagles and noble symbols. Behind them waited thousands of lighter troops, Lithuanian riders with curved sabers. Russian units carrying long spears and Tatar horse archers fixing fresh arrows to their bows. To an outsider, it might have looked chaotic or unorganized, but King Jagiho understood something the Teutonic knights did not. Strength does not always come from being the same. Sometimes it comes from being different if those differences work together. The battlefield itself seemed to hold its breath. The grass swayed lightly, as if waiting for the first scream, the first hoofbeat, the first clash of steel. King Jagiho observed everything carefully from a small hill. His eyes moved from the forests on the right to the marshlands on the left. He knew the land better than the Teutonic knights did. He knew where the ground would hold under the weight of charging horses and where it would swallow them whole. But most importantly, he knew that time was his ally. The Teutonic army had been standing in direct sunlight all morning. Their armor trapped heat, their throats were dry, and the weight on their shoulders was starting to feel heavier with each passing minute. Sweat ran into their eyes, into their collars, into the cloth under their helmets. Some knights shifted uncomfortably, but none dared break formation. Across the field, Polish and Lithuanian troops still rested in the shade of the trees. Some drank water. Some checked their saddles. Some prayed quietly. They knew their king was waiting on purpose. This difference in patience would soon decide the fate of thousands. The Teutonic Grand Master, Ulrich von Jungingen, grew more and more frustrated. He wanted the enemy to charge. He wanted the battle to begin on his terms. Every moment of waiting made him feel like control was slipping away from him. So he tried to provoke the Polish king, sending those infamous naked swords. wrapped in insults meant to sting Giagio into a reckless attack. But the insult had the opposite effect. It was not Giagio who lost patience. It was Ulrich. The sun climbed higher. The heat grew painful. Knights could feel their armor baking them from the inside. Horses shifted and snorted, their muscles tense. The air felt thick, as if the heat alone might ignite the entire battlefield. Giagio finally mounted his horse. The entire Polish-Lithuanian army went silent, waiting for his command. His calm presence spread through the ranks like a cool wind. He lifted his hands slowly, signaling the beginning of movement, not a charge. It's not an attack, but a simple advance to formation. Across the field, the Teutonic knights straightened their posture. They thought this was the moment the enemies would run into their killing zone. But even now, Giagio did not rush. He arranged his troops with precision. Lithuanians on the right, Poles on the left, reserves behind, hidden by small rises in the terrain. Tatters spread along the side, ready to strike like a sudden storm. Everything was part of a larger plan, a plan Ulrich could not see because he was blinded by pride. The Teutonic right wing, filled with crusaders from France and Germany, waited eagerly. Their horses pawed the earth. Their lances angled forward. The Grand Marshal, Friedrich von Wallenrode, watched the Polish lines with cold concentration, ready to respond to anything. On the Teutonic left, Kuno von Liechtenstein tightened his formation. His knights were strong, experienced, and hungry for battle. They had no idea that their greatest mistake would come not from weakness, but from confidence between the two armies. 1 kilometer of grain fields shimmered under the sun like a golden sea. That empty space felt like the center of the world, a place where history itself was waiting to be written. The men who stood on that field had no idea that within a few hours, it would become a graveyard. They did not know that the Teutonic Order's perfect armor would turn into metal coffins. They did not know that marshes nearby would swallow entire knightly formations. They did not know that clever tactics, not holy prayers, would decide the day. They only knew one thing. The moment of battle was near. Giagio lowered his hand. Trumpets sounded across the Polish-Lithuanian line. Drums echoed through the forests. Horses began to move forward step by step. Across the field, Teutonic knights gripped their lances. The stage was set. Every man braced for the storm that was about to break. A storm that would shake the foundations of medieval Europe. A storm that would destroy one of the strongest military orders in the world. This was the moment before the fire. The last deep breath before history exploded in steel and blood. Asterisk, the moment the Polish-Lithuanian army began to advance. The air itself seemed to tighten. Every man on the field knew that the quiet morning was over. What came next would decide the fate of nations. It began on the right flank. Grand Duke Vytautas of Lithuania raised his banner high, long cloth marked with ancient symbols of the old gods. His riders responded with a deep roar, a sound that mixed excitement, fear, and determination. Moments later, thousands of Lithuanian, Russian, and Tatar horsemen surged forward like a dark wave rolling across the field. The Teutonic left wing braced itself. Kuno von Liechtenstein watched the approaching riders with a confident stare. To him, this was simply another reckless eastern charge that would break harmlessly against the armor and discipline of his knights. He ordered his ranks to hold formation. Crossbowmen lifted their weapons. Heavy cavalry lowered their lances. Then the first arrows fell. Totter. Horse archers released their volleys while galloping at full speed, each shot fired with deadly accuracy. The arrows did not pierce the Teutonic armor easily, but they found every weakness: gaps in the visor, joints at the elbows, straps near the neck, openings behind the knees. Horses cried out as shafts buried into their muscles. Some knights fell before the charge even landed, but still, the Teutonic line did not break. When the Lithuanians collided with them, sound was enormous, like a thunderclap ripping through the sky. Lances shattered on shields. Sabers clashed against steel. Horses rammed into one another, their hooves striking the ground like drums of war. The first minutes were chaos. Men screamed in Polish. Lithuanian, German, Russian, and Tatar. Dust exploded in the air. Bodies twisted, rolled, and fell. But even through all this, the Teutonic Knights held strong. Their armor absorbed the worst blows. Their discipline kept them from scattering. Step by step, they pushed the lighter Lithuanian riders back to outside eyes. It looked as if the Teutonic left wing was winning. But Vytautas had not expected his lighter troops to break the Teutonic Knights. He knew this clash was only the opening act. His riders were not there to crush the enemy. They were there to pull the enemy exactly where he wanted them. And soon, the first signs of the Teutonic mistake appeared, under constant pressure from arrows and hit-and-run attacks. Kuno's wings soon believed they were forcing the Lithuanians into retreat. Lithuanian banners drifted backward. Units broke apart. Riders turned their horses and raced toward the forest line. Dust clouds rose behind them as if they were truly fleeing in terror. A cheer broke out among the Teutonic Knights. Kuno, von Liechtenstein, did not hesitate. He was a warrior of pride, raised in a culture where retreat meant weakness and pursuit meant honor. He believed he was watching the enemy collapse, so he made the decision that would break his entire wing. He ordered his division to chase. Thousands of Teutonic Knights thundered forward, leaving their formation, abandoning discipline, and plunging across the field after the fleeing Lithuanians. Their armor shined. Their banners snapped proudly in the wind. Their spirits were high, but their judgment was gone. What? Kuno thought panic was something different, something older, smarter, and far more dangerous. It was a feigned retreat, a tactic perfected by Mongols, used by steppe warriors for centuries, learned by the Lithuanian cavalry. Through hard battles in the east, the Teutonic Knights did not notice where they were riding. They did not see the ground slowly change beneath them. They did not realize the soil was growing softer, their horses sinking deeper, their movements becoming slower. They were riding into marshland. Witus watched this from a distance. His face showed no excitement, no triumphantly cold calculation. He raised his hand again. The Lithuanian banners behind the trees suddenly moved. Fresh cavalry, untouched by the initial fighting, burst out of the forest. The fleeing Lithuanians suddenly turned their horses around. Thousands of riders who had been pretending to run now charged forward with full force, striking the Teutonic Knights from the front. While the hidden reserve slammed into their flank, Kuno realized the trap too late. His knights, scattered from chasing too far, were now surrounded in swampy ground, where their heavy horses struggled to move. The lighter Lithuanian and Tatar horses danced around them, striking from all angles. Riders with axes, curved sabers, and maces swarmed the trapped knights, like wolves around a wounded boar. The Teutonic left wing began to collapse. Some of the knights tried to turn their horses back toward the main battlefield, but the mud slowed them. Others were pulled from their saddles. A knight in full-plate armor was nearly helpless, once unhorsed. The marsh water sucked at their boots, dragging them down. And everywhere, Lithuanian weapons struck armor again and again. Kuno von Liechtenstein himself fought fiercely, but surrounded, exhausted, and stuck in heavy armor, he could not escape. Several Lithuanian warriors pulled him from his horse. A warhammer crushed his helmet. The man who had once been a symbol of Teutonic power died with mud on his boots and enemy, blades above him, while the Teutonic left wing was being destroyed far from the main battle. Something else was happening at the center. The Poles had been waiting. The moment the Teutonic left wing disappeared into the chase, the Polish heavy cavalry moved forward with thunderous speed. Their banners closed tight. Their horses charged with perfect discipline. They struck the Teutonic center like a falling mountain. Lances drove into the ranks of the order, shields cracked. Horses tumbled. Knights were thrown backward by the force. This was not a messy or scattered charge. It was a coordinated attack executed with absolute precision. And this time, the Teutonic Order felt fear. Because now, for the first time in 200 years, their battle line had a hole. Their left wing was gone. Their center was weakening. And their Grand Master, who believed victory was certain, was suddenly facing a storm he could not control. The real battle was only beginning, and the Teutonic Order was already losing pieces they could never replace. The battlefield had now split into two different worlds. Far on the left, the Teutonic knights were sinking in marshes, surrounded by Lithuanian riders. Their white cloaks snapped in panic. Their horses screamed. Their lances floated uselessly in muddy water. That wing was collapsing like a wall hit by a sudden storm. But at the center of the field, another storm was forming, one even more violent. Polish heavy cavalry, the strongest armored riders of Eastern Europe, thundered into the Teutonic center like a hammer striking iron. Their charge was organized, timed, and clean. Their banners did not shake. Their shield walls did not break. They were not chasing glory or following a plan. The Teutonic center felt the full force of that plan. Grand Marshal Friedrich von Wallenrode, the man responsible for keeping the Teutonic lines firm, shouted commands through the chaos. He rode his horse back and forth, trying to pull men together, trying to push reserves forward, trying to close the gap that had opened when the left wing disappeared. But the line did not behave like it usually did. This was not the confident, unstoppable force the Teutonic Order had been for centuries. This was an army fighting blind. Heat made it worse. The July sun pounded down on armored men who had been standing in heavy steel since dawn. Sweat filled their helmets. Their breathing grew fast and hot. Their vision blurred. Some knights felt their strength slipping away before any blade touched them. Polish knights rotated their formations, fresh riders replacing tired ones, pushing forward with new energy each time. The Teutonic knights had no such system. They were trained to push forward endlessly. Never retreat, never rest, never rotate. Today, that tradition was turning into a curse. The Polish war hymn, Bogorodica, rose above the sound of battle. It sounded like a single voice, a wave of faith smashing into the Teutonic line. To the Teutonic knights, who believed God favored them, hearing the enemy sing like that was unsettling. For the first time that day, doubt slipped into their hearts. As the Polish charge deepened, the Teutonic center began to bend. Not break, just bend. But even a bend in the Teutonic line was something Europe had never seen before. Then something happened that changed everything. A huge explosion burst from the Teutonic rear. One of their bombards, the early cannons meant to impress the enemy, had exploded, killing its own crew. Smoke shot into the air. Teutonic soldiers near it panicked. Horses reared. Some knights thought the enemy had fired a secret weapon. The Order's army, which always relied on perfect order and structure, began to lose rhythm, but the worst was still to come. Grand Duke Vytautas, Lithuanian forces, having destroyed Kuno von Liechtenstein's wing, now reappeared on the battlefield not as retreating riders, but as a fresh force approaching the exhausted Teutons. From the side, it was like seeing ghosts return from the forest. Many Teutonic knights did not even understand how the Lithuanians had survived, let alone returned. They had believed the Lithuanians had run in fear. Now those same riders were charging at them with renewed strength. The Teutonic center was now being hit from two sides. Friedrich von Wallenrode saw the danger before anyone else. He tried to rally his men, but the pressure was too much. In the chaos, a Polish knight found the weak spot under his arm and thrust a lance into his lung. Wallenrode fell from his horse, clutching his chest, blood bubbling through his lips. When he fell, his entire division wavered. Commanders tried shouting orders, but the noise of battle drowned every word. Knights looked left, right, and behind them only to see more enemies, more banners, more looming shadows. All around them the field was swirling with dust and sweat and death. Polish infantry poured forward. Lithuanian cavalry circled like wolves. Tatars launched arrows into clusters of Teutonic knights who could not move. Men in shining armor were now trapped in a boiling pot of steel. Grand Master Ulrich von Jungen, who had watched from the back, now realized something terrifying. The largest army he had ever commanded was being slowly crushed on all sides, but Ulrich was a man of pride. He was not the type to retreat. He was not the type to save himself while his knights died. In his mind, Honor allowed only one choice. Either he would win the battle with one final strike, or he would die on the field. He chose the strike. Ulrich gathered, reserved the elite 16 banners of the Teutonic Order. These were the strongest, Ulrich's most skilled knights alive. Their armor sparkled like silver fire. Their helmets carried eagles and crosses. Their war horses were taller and stronger than any others. These 3,000 knights were the pride of the entire order. They were the last hope, the last blade of the Teutonic world. Ulrich raised his sword and shouted words that later chroniclers claim to remember, "We die here or we win here." His banners lifted. His knights lowered their lances. Their horses pawed the earth. The charge began. If the ground itself could feel fear, it would have trembled. The Teutonic elite crashed forward with such force that even the Polish cavalry braced themselves. The charge smashed through the first Polish line, crushing it like paper. It tore through the second line, sending men tumbling from their saddles. For a moment, a brief, frightening moment, it looked as if Ulrich might break through too. King Jagiho himself. The Polish king's bodyguards rushed to surround him, forming a tight circle. Blades flashed. Horses collided. The Teutonic knights roared with righteous fury as they pushed deeper and deeper into the Polish ranks. Ulrich rode at the front. His armor was decorated with gold crosses and imperial symbols. He was impossible to miss. He looked like a living statue of war, and that made him the target. Dozens of Polish and Lithuanian fighters lunged for him. Weapons struck his armor again and again. Sparks burst from his helmet. Blood splashed onto his white cloak. A Polish knight dented his helmet with a sword. Ulrich turned to face him just as a Lithuanian. Duke drove a lance through the Grandmaster's visor. The steel tip pierced his skull. Ulrich fell from his horse. His banner collapsed beside him, and with him died the heart of the Teutonic Order. Within minutes, every senior commander around him was dead. The Order's leadership was gone. The knights had no orders, no direction, no hope. The center broke. Then the entire army broke. What had begun as a proud crusading force now became a sea of men running in every direction, trying to escape a battlefield that had turned into a trap of forests, marshes, and enemies everywhere. The Order of the Black Cross was collapsing, fall by fall, step by step, night by night. Asterisk, when Grandmaster Ulrich hit the ground, the battle did not simply shift it, transformed. The Teutonic Order, a force that had stood unbroken for 2 centuries, now felt its spine snap. Word spread faster than arrows. The Grand Master is dead. The banner has fallen. For an army built on strict order, clear command, and unshakable faith. The death of their leader was like removing the keystone from an arch. Everything began to collapse at once. Knights who had stood fearless hours earlier now looked around and saw only enemies and chaos. The Polish and Lithuanian troops pressed forward, filling the gaps left by broken Teutonic formations. Lithuanian horsemen surrounded smaller pockets of German knights. Polish infantry pushed forward like a rising tide. Tatars circled fleeing riders, shooting arrows into their backs. The Teutonic Order, once feared by continent-wide kingdoms, now fought like men trying to escape drowning. The battlefield turned into something no one had imagined that. Morning, the marshes became the first graveyard. Knights who tried to flee toward the wetlands found their horses slipping into deep mud. Heavy armor pulled both horse and rider down. Some tried to fight their way out, using swords and shields as leverage, but the weight of steel dragged them deeper. Horses screamed, kicking violently as water filled their nostrils. Men sank slowly, their hands clawing at the muddy surface, their voices muffled under helmets. From the bank, Polish and Lithuanian riders watched the scene with cold eyes. Some used the tips of their lances to push struggling knights under, ending their lives quickly or cruelly. Depending on the heart behind the blade, if the marsh was a graveyard, then the forest was a hunting ground. Dozens of Teutonic knights, stripped of formation and in full armor, tried to flee into the trees. But the forest belonged to the Lithuanians and Tatars. Their light horses weaved easily between trunks, Their arrows found every opening in the knights' backs and necks. Some knights dismounted and attempted to run on foot, but armor that once symbolized strength now became a metal cage. They could barely lift their legs. Every step sounded like a hammer strike. Every breath felt like fire. Some dropped their swords and raised their hands, offering ransom a noble knight's last hope. But not everyone on that battlefield cared about ransom. Not the tatters. Not the peasants who arrived with scythes and pitchforks, seeking revenge for years of Teutonic cruelty. Some knights were dragged down by 10 men at once, stripped of armor, and killed on the spot. The greatest horror lay at the center of the field. By late afternoon, bodies covered the ground so thick that horses hesitated to step. The once golden grain fields now looked like waves of red cloth. Teutonic cloaks, soaked in blood, lay everywhere. The air was heavy with screams of wounded men begging for water, calling for priests, or crying for family miles away.